everybody, and welcome back to the Cinefile, the podcast celebrating cinema one film at a time. Each week, my co-host Jake Biller and I break down a film, discussing anything from scenes you missed to mise en scène. Today, Jake and I talk the tension that boils to the surface on the hottest day of the year by musing on 1989's Do the Right Thing. Jake, this is your pick this week, so I'm going to pass it off to you. Why did we pick it? I think we both know why we picked it. And what are your thoughts?
So, one, it's just a really great movie. You can't see it because those are the only two posters you see. But on my wall to my right here, I have this poster for Do the Right Thing because it's a really good movie. But I picked it when I was filling out the schedule with my picks for the year. I was like, August is usually hot. And, I was off by a week because last week, ooh, doggy, it was hot. At least in central Indiana where we are, and most of the country, it was pretty hot.
Last week sucked. It was very, very hot. Yes.
It was like, so I go to work at 3 a.m. There were days I left for work and it was already 80 degrees.
Yeah.
It was terrible.
It's disgusting.
It was gross. So this movie is the premise is everyone's pissed off because it's hot.
Which is incredibly relatable.
Yes,
because I get really pissed off when I'm hot.
I saw one of those random like Facebook suggested posts or whatever, but it was a cake with a sun on it, and it said, "I'm sorry for being mean to you," when it was 109 degrees out, and I'm like, honestly, same.
Yeah, if it's, people have asked me before about missions trips, and I've been on one. And the biggest downfall with a mission trip with me is that it gets so hot and there's not enough relief, and my body doesn't know how to process heat properly. So I just get I can't handle it. I get so hot, and then I start freaking out. It's a whole thing. That's a different type of podcast, but
mission trip to Seattle.
I literally what?
It doesn't get hot in Seattle.
Oh, I was like, no. I was like, it was a trip to New Jersey, and I hate New Jersey. Except if you live in New Jersey, we love you here on the podcast, but in general, I have not had a good experience in New Jersey. What?
How you doing?
I thought you were saying, what are you doing? You're like, stop digging the hole. I'm like, I'm filling in the hole. I'm filling in the hole, Jake. Anyway, I'd heard of this movie, but I didn't really know what it was about. So when you suggested it for this week, I started watching it, and then I texted you almost immediately as like, I know why you picked it for this week. Because as I'm sitting here sweating my butt off, I'm watching other people on screen sweat their butt off.
It's a very relatable experience here.
And
in that aspect.
Yeah. And this movie is almost a tale of two movies in a way. I know we have some different talking points that we want to discuss, but first off, the beginning and end of this movie are like two completely different things in a way, but also not
different places. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I texted you. What did I say? I said something about what this reminded me of.
I think you said something about Sesame Street.
I said this reminds me of a mix between In the Heights and Sesame Street. You've got the endearing kind of quirky characters of Sesame Street that live on the same street and everybody knows each other, and which is kind of the same in the Heights, but you've got the heat element of In the Heights and the tension of In the Heights. But I take that back. Like the first part of that movie that's true, but by the end it kind of turns into a whole nother thing.
There's no minor race riots in Sesame Street.
Yeah, that would be an interesting episode. So why don't we just start talking about auteurism?
Yeah.
This movie was directed by Spike Lee, which, as many of you, I'm sure you've heard of Spike Lee. If you like basketball, Spike Lee is like the biggest Knicks fan of all time. But he's also an auteur filmmaker. Mm-hmm. So let's talk a little bit about what auteurism is. I don't know if I think we've mentioned it a little bit before, but for the folks at home, Jake, could you do a quick refresher?
Auteurism is basically a filmmaking theory or a school of thought, if you will, that is basically kind of centers around is the product of one person's vision. You know, you have a central auteur. Is that Latin or Latin based? It
Um,
sounds like Latin.
yeah, I think. Well, it probably comes from ars artis,
Yeah.
which I believe is art in Latin.
Mm. Well,
So auteur, maybe it's like a French version of that.
yeah. I always remembered it as like author. Is
Yeah,
auteur sounds like author to me. And so it's like you have like a central author that's like crafting the story. It's usually talked about in terms of directors. It you can it has been applied to different aspects. I know your thesis was about auteurism in Star Wars and changing auteurism, but
and you
uh,
know what? It was proven right this week when Ahsoka debuted to great reviews by both critics and audiences. My thesis was proven right. You know what? Since we mentioned it and it's finally been published on Cardinal Scholar, we're gonna leave a link down below if you want to go and read it. You'll see the link. We'll post it there for my 100-page
yes.
thesis. Buckle up. It's a quick read.
No, it's not. I read it.
No,
No,
it's
it's
not. And it
not.
also didn't take me like a year to write it.
But anyways, uh back to auteurism and how it relates to this. Um Spike Lee is very much an auteur. But it looking at his filmography, especially his early stuff, which I would say like this is I guess you could call it like the end of his early stuff.
Okay.
Thinking of things like She's Gotta Have It. That might have been his first film.
What is it? She's in the Habit?
She's Gotta Have It. Um, there's School Days. There's Mo Better Blues. Um, yeah, I'm a little fuzzy on how all those fall into in with each other. But I mean, you see Spike Lee. He plays Mookie in this, so he's fairly young.
Right.
And so we kind of call him on our tour, and really he reminds me um of like a Charlie Chaplin, if you will, and the fact that like he wrote and directed and produced and starred in this.
Right.
Also kind of to um to another example, I guess you could say, much less well known than Charlie Chaplin, but early pioneer of black cinema is Oscar Micheaux from the 20s. Was a black filmmaker that made Silence, that wrote and directed and starred in a lot of his films. So that's yeah. Anyways, I'm just rambling about boring academic stuff, but we call it an auteur because if you look at like all the like lead creative roles of a movie, like Spike Lee occupies, not operates,
Yeah.
occupies all those. He is the one who wrote the story. He is the one who directed it. He's managing all the stories woven together. He's giving a performance in it, and then even just kind of extending outward. Spike Lee has in his early work has a very like I call it family auteurism because he uses a lot of his family members in this. I mean, Bill Lee, his father, was the one who wrote the score for this.
Mm-hmm.
He was he was a composer and a band leader, and so he wrote the score for this.
Which is so good.
It is very good. I
It's
really
so
enjoy
good.
this.
I'm a huge jazz guy.
Yeah.
So I like the saxophone is my favorite instrument. No offense, Jake, to the bass or Daniel to the cello. But the saxophone is just like the coolest. I played it for 6 weeks and it was the best
This
six
man
weeks.
played it for 6 weeks and said, "This is the best instrument ever." I quit.
And then I said, I want to do choir instead. And now I'm me. Um, but yeah, no, I mean, I know we talked Rear Window 2 weeks ago and
Mm-hmm.
talked about diegetic versus non-diegetic score. And while this is non-diegetic,
Yeah.
uh it just has such a personality to it
Mhm.
that I think it's they use jazz to create tension, which is
Mhm.
something that I didn't know was possible necessarily because jazz is pretty chill. It's pretty mellow, uh,
Yeah.
for the most part.
Um,
I had never heard it used this way.
hmm, interesting. I think it's neat that they use jazz or a jazz influenced style to add tension to it because um jazz is very loose and improvisational, and the way the chords are structured, without getting into too much music theory weeds here, um there's tension built into the chords, and how you alter it from a major, a major scale or a major chord, uh, uh, or a major key, I guess would be a better way to say it. You alter that for jazz chords and jazz licks. You alter that slightly, and so it adds a little more tension to it. Um, it sounds a little more unstable, and it's interesting because it doesn't seem to follow the pattern, or it kind of creates its own pattern. Um,
Mm.
so I think that's interesting that you found that it built the tension more.
Yeah, I mean I really, especially in that third act, which we'll get
Yeah.
to, it I I mean the one of the things, so I looked up this movie because I didn't know anything about it. And I looked up this movie while I was watching it, and the one of the top three words that it said on Google, because you know how when you look at a movie, it has like thought provoking, witty, and funny or
Mhm.
something like that. One of them was like tension
Yeah.
or intense, and you would think from the beginning you're like, okay, I can see maybe some tension there, but by the end, I mean, it really ramps up.
Yeah.
And just I was just so impressed with the score because it really did, for me at least, just just help emphasize that tension.
Mhm.
Right. I started to really feel it. And that's when I know I love a movie, is when you get that visceral reaction, when you get that tension, you actually are feeling it, your heart is pumping, you're sweating, and not because it's hot outside. It's intense. And I think just the culmination of the fact that he was able to add so many layers
Mhm.
of chords at the same time, but yet it didn't sound terrible.
Mhm.
And Obviously I'm not super well versed in instruments like you are. The voice is my instrument. And so That's something I don't need to study chord placement.
Yeah.
Uh,
Right.
you know what I mean? But it, I was just, again, that was like one of the highlights for me,
Yeah.
and it's going to be one of my roses is the score because
No. Yeah.
it is just spectacular.
I agree. The score is very good. Um, Moving on to another family member, Spike Lee's sister Joie Lee plays Jade in this.
His
So
sister in the
plays
movie.
his sister in the movie. So that's an interesting choice, and I really liked her in this. She kind of stood out more than previous watches for me in this, so I really enjoyed her. Um, and then his Spike Lee's one of his brothers, David Lee. I was scrolling through all the credits trying to find all the family connections I could
He
find,
said
and
Command F Lee. Just,
his brother David Lee was took behind the scenes stills, was a photographer for during the
okay.
production, so even had them on it. And then kind of familial, not really. But Ossie Davis and Ruby Dee, who plays Ossie Davis plays the mayor, and then
Ruby Dee
Ru-
plays sister,
mother
mother
sister.
sister.
They're a real life married couple, and they're longtime friends of Bill Lee.
Oh,
So
interesting.
they kind of agreed to be in this film because it's Bill's son.
Interesting. Okay.
And so all this to bring this back to auteurism is, it's like there's, I think when you work with someone that you're related to or like you've grown up around, like there I would imagine that there is an inherent like unspoken quality to the working process, right? You don't always have to go through all the steps you would have to with, you know, a director and actor who've never worked together before. So it's like almost like an extension of your brain, maybe.
Yeah.
Working with family or working with very, very close friends. That's why you see a lot of successful directors will use like the same in the
People.
case of the same cinematographers, the same writers, the same composers,
I mean,
whatnot.
Has used the same cinematographer very frequently. He had like one editor he used
Yeah.
until early 2000s.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, John Williams has composed all but like four of his films.
Yeah.
And so yeah, I and the thing I wanted to mention too is there are some, especially in academic circles, there are some professors and things like that that don't give a lot of credit to auteur theory. And while I understand where they're coming from, it's more from its origin, which is
Mm-hmm.
a Charlie Chaplin who wrote, directed, scored. He also scored it,
Mm-hmm.
his films and acted in them. But this is as close as you're gonna get, and
Yeah.
it, especially for an early filmmaker, a
Mm-hmm.
lot of times you don't have those deep rooted connections that almost make it like an extension, like a Spielberg. So for him to have all of his family involved in this, is really really cool, and
Yeah.
that's why you're absolutely right in calling it like it's like family auteurism. And the other thing, a lot of times with auteur filmmakers, they have a singular vision, and sometimes that can get muddied.
Mm-hmm.
And what I mean by that is that, well, muddied is probably not the right word, but it when you have a singular vision and you're enacting it, you have blind spots.
Yeah.
And this is a unique circumstance because it's like auteurism, but there's so many people involved
Yeah.
that I think some of the blind spots are covered over here,
Yeah.
where other people like a Christopher Nolan and Tenet, he obviously wanted to use dialogue as a part of the soundscape, not necessarily as super, super important to the story. And people didn't like that. But if he had people around him that was like, hey, we understand what you're going for here, but people are going to want to hear what these actors are saying. You know, that's kind of like a blind spot. And so this film, thinking about it and watching it, I don't think there are nearly as many blind spots for an auteur filmmaker in this as something like a Christopher Nolan in Tenet,
Mm-hmm.
and or George Lucas thinking Jar Jar Banks was a good idea. Like
Oh goodness.
he literally says when they screen Phantom Menace for the first time, he's like, I may have gone too far in a few places. It's like, what a legend.
Oh
Um,
goodness. Oh
yes.
George.
So I
Um,
mean,
but
yeah, I just really like
yeah, and you point out how that singular vision can kind of be a hindrance sometimes.
it. Mm-hmm.
Um, I'm not like I understand auteurism, and it's not like I don't subscribe to it. I think it's not. I think a lot of people hold up auteurism sometimes to be like, oh, like look at this like incredible like artistic like vision and experience, and I think sometimes that is to the detriment of the movie, and I don't feel like it's um how do I want to say this? I don't feel like having that one singular focused vision um is what movie making is about necessarily. Because
Yeah,
to me, movie making is creating something that is greater than the sum of any one person's contribution, right? It's
right.
about the interaction between the taking the story from in your head to on the page to in the director's mind to communicating that out to the actors to them creating a performance to then that being put together. Like there's so many people involved in so many steps that the story is altered in each phase, and it's through those contributions of all those people that you're refining that and making it better and making it better and making it different and seeing those blind spots that a true one singular vision is not going to see. And so
Right.
usually like auteurism is something that I'm a little leery of, but I think here it works. I think in some of Spike Lee's other stuff, I don't know if it necessarily does work, but in here
I
it works. Um,
and
and
I can see that with Spike Lee because my understanding of Spike Lee, and I had realized, and I had texted you, I had never seen any other Spike Lee joints. I had seen one. I saw Black Klansman.
mhm,
Great film.
incredible,
It's 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 a banger. It's so good. But and John David Washington is so good. Anyway,
elite.
elite. Um, but my understanding was that he had a pretty heavy creative hand
Mhm.
on his projects, and that is something that also kind of turns me off, like Wes Anderson. Okay, I haven't seen a lot of Wes Anderson films, and part of the reason why is because it takes me out of the film every time I watch one, like his artistic style, because it's cool, but also now like Asteroid City just came out a couple of months ago, and everybody at the theater was talking about they're like it's like a caricature of himself. It is just so heavy-handed
Mhm.
in like it's like he's in love with his own style.
Yeah.
And so that is one reason because I do like auteur cinema. I might like it more than you. From but not that it's competition, but I especially with people like Wes Anderson or my understanding of Spike Lee, and I'm sure it's a case by case basis with his films, but it was something that I really that's why I hadn't engaged
Mhm.
in watching his cinema. And so I'm glad you kind of introduced that to me. But this isn't the only thing tourism isn't the only big
Yes.
important thing here. I mean, we could also talk about the classic homages and influences
Yes.
that a lot of times, especially with auteur filmmakers, you can see even more clearly
Yeah.
because it's very clear where their influences came from. And since they have a singular vision, it's carried out maybe a little bit more obviously
Mhm.
than in more of a studio picture.
Yeah. This is one thing I really want to talk about. Shocking. The classics nerds wants to talk about classic homages in this movie. Wow, breaking news.
Wow.
Um,
Owen Wilson. Wow. Ka-chow.
oh my gosh. The fact that that man played
Spindrift.
Lightning,
Sponsor us.
the fact that that man played Lightning McQueen still kind of baffles me. But
Okay, no. The fact that Michael Keaton played Chick Hicks, that baffles me.
Kachiga,
Ka-ching.
Kachiga. Goodness. Um, Classical influences. Cars is not a classical influence. Um, so the most obvious one is Radio Raheem's Knuckle, the love and hate.
Yeah.
That is, I would say, the most blatant one. That is from from this movie in the 50s called Night of the Hunter. It's like a thriller with Robert Mitchum, and
Okay.
he plays this like really like I don't want to say fundamentalist preacher, but like very like fire and brimstone preacher, but who's also
Mm-hmm.
like it's all a cover up for him being a criminal. Um, and he gives a very similar Radio Raheem basically paraphrases the whole love and hate speech from Robert Mitchum's speech because he has on one hand love tattooed and hate tattooed, just like Radio Raheem has the they're not
Yeah,
brass
he's got the
knuckles.
brass knuckles. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess they're brass knuckles. Um, and
The
so
entire hand ring.
yes, the
Can you
forefinger.
imagine being like, honey, will you marry me? And it's just like a ring, four ring. Put your hand out. It's like
uh, but so that's like the most obvious one, and like that stuck out to me like the first time I watched it. I picked up on that right away. But there's some other ones. Reading up on this, apparently Spike Lee was kind of got the idea for this watching an old episode of it was a TV series that ran Alfred Hitchcock Presents.
okay,
Um,
sure, yeah.
and the story was based around like people going like crazy and doing like outlandish things just because it's so dang hot. Um, So like that was kind of one of his early influences. I've also read that um Predator was an influence for Spike Lee, which I found like is really interesting. Um yeah,
Hmm.
basically like the way the quote it had from Spike Lee was saying like racial tension was his predator in this movie. And I'm like,
Oh.
I would have to watch. It has been a
Ooh.
while since I've seen Predator, and I don't know if I've actually seen Predator all the way through. But like, I would have to
That's
I would have to rewatch that with that in mind. But
that's really that's good. Wow,
no,
that's really good.
just
Yeah,
thinking like
he's right.
Spike, just thinking that Spike Lee was like, yeah, an episode of Alfred Hitchcock and Predator, and I can combine that into a movie. Like that's just is a
Yeah,
meme to me.
that,
Um,
I mean, and obviously then we've got the influences of both Malcolm X and Martin Luther King Jr.,
oh
which are
yes, yeah,
mentioned multiple times, even in kind of the closing credits
yeah,
mentioned. And so those, it was very clear to me, like the last two quotes, I should have written them down, but like the last quotes in the movie um made I kind of had figured this is where he was going with the film,
mm-hmm.
but it just showed how much influence those
Yeah,
two figures had on the messaging of
yeah.
the film.
And let's talk about that a little bit because I think that's really interesting. For me, I remember watching this movie the first time and like having almost like kind of like this existential moment of like, what is this supposed to mean to me as like that last scene is going, and then basically the whole like from the climax to through the descending action. Um, I was like, what is this supposed? What am I supposed to get out of this? And then it was when those two quotes rolled on the screen that like it clicked for me. There was a very like aha moment of like to me this is making a commentary. It's almost like saying like I don't know what the right answer is. Like I know what the
Right.
problem is, but I don't know what the right answer is. And you're taking two extremely prominent figures that I would say probably the two biggest leading figures in the civil rights movement in the United States during the 1960s, like the two leaders of kind of opposing factions or very ideologically different factions, shall we say.
Yeah.
Two very different schools of thought. One, obviously, Martin Luther King is nonviolent protest, and then
Right.
Malcolm X is more aligned with the Black Panthers and you know minorities fighting back against and taking an active role in resisting injustice
Oppression.
and resorting to violence if necessary to protect their communities. Um, and so it was like I feel like so many times we when we talk about race and like racial like inequity in this country, it we kind of try and boil down to like, well, do you think MLK is right or do you think Malcolm X is right? And I feel like Spike Lee, with how prevalently both of those guys are mentioned, and then those two quotes at the end, he's almost saying like, to me, he's almost saying like, I don't know who's right, but I know we need to fix it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's more of a think piece.
Yeah,
It's saying it's putting both sides out there and saying it's not my place to decide.
yeah,
It's every single person's place to decide. And that is one of the reasons why I actually like I love this movie.
I'm
I'm
glad.
not pulling the well, I'm glad you liked it this week because I really, really enjoyed this movie, but I appreciated the messaging
Yeah,
because it wasn't sometimes filmmakers can be really overbearing with the antagonist
mm-hmm.
when it comes to like a heavy message film. Like it, a lesser filmmaker could have made this movie and made it from a point of view where Sal was the bad guy
Mm-hmm.
the whole time.
Yeah,
or Sal and those police officers were the bad guys the whole time. But really, every character in this movie is significantly flawed.
Oh yeah.
And by doing that, that means that honestly, in a way, no one is the true antagonist and no one is the true protagonist.
Yeah.
And in doing that, that was brilliant. It
Mm.
was brilliant because it highlighted the messaging without alienating one side.
Yeah.
Right. Because me, a very, very white man,
Mm.
a straight white man, right, could watch this, and a lesser filmmaker could either, depending on their stance, I guess they could say, oh, well, Sal was right or Sal was wrong. And then because I relate more to Sal as being, a white man in America, could say, okay, you're attacking me or you're
Mm.
agreeing with me, and vice versa. If I was somebody else and I was another part of it, like a different ethnic group,
Yeah.
and watch this, I could say, oh, you're vilifying me or you are agreeing with my stances. And so by doing it the way in which Spike Lee did, he was able to get both sides to agree. It's brilliant. It's
Yeah.
brilliant. There are certain types of people that Walter Cronkite, stick with me for this. Walter Cronkite, you didn't know his politics. He read you the news.
Mm-hmm.
And you probably could maybe guess a little bit where he was coming from politically, but he never outright said it.
Mm-hmm.
And it was never something that you would really be able to figure out. That kind of person, when you kind of he didn't alienate one side or the other.
Yeah.
Both sides at the same time thought, that's my guy.
Mm-hmm.
Which, if you're that much of a unit that you can do that,
Yeah.
and that's everybody's gonna like it.
Yeah.
That, and well, for the most part, nothing's ever concrete.
Right.
But in this case, Spike Lee was able to do it where both sides were like, they get it.
Yeah.
And it's actually not a two-side thing. It's multiple different sides. It's the MLK side. It's the Malcolm X side. It's the honestly Italian Americans at that time in New York side. It's the police side. They're so, and what he was able to do was address all of these issues from both sides without saying who was right.
Yeah. It's very multifaceted. And I think it is presented in a way that I don't know how it would be perceived today. Like I don't, I guess, but I'm not. There's no, I guess you could say like metrics to back this up, but like a lot of white critics at the time, like thought this was going to cause a race riot. Thought this movie was going to cause a race riot. But it's like that's not what this movie's about.
No, not at all.
This movie is like it invites all sides to the conversation. And it invites you to find yourself in this movie and examine where you fit in this issue and examine yourself.
Right.
And examine your role in this, whether it is a role that you have sought out or created for yourself or one that you were born into.
Yeah.
It invites you to examine really just societal race structure in America and how we all play into that. And I think that is just the brilliance of this movie, and especially the ending, and how if you really open yourself up to it, you can learn a lot about the world around you, and I think you can learn a lot about yourself. One other thing I wanted to talk about with this movie is the cinematography, and actually I want to get your take on it, Ben, because it's very distinct. It's very like it has a very like distinct style and flavor to it that when I first watched it was a little off-putting, but I really appreciate now.
I noticed it, but I don't think that was a bad thing.
Yeah.
It wasn't something for me that was super off-putting. It was just kind of like, it was the vibe. Like
Mhm.
it just matched so well with kind of the vibe of the rest of the film that I was kind of okay with it. Like even even the color grading in this. I mean, the colors are a little bit brighter. Kind of, I don't know. It just very. It was like very 90s,
Mhm.
if that makes sense. And I kind of was okay with it. I thought, um, I actually think shooting it kind of more traditionally wouldn't have made it work as well.
Mhm.
Like you, I think you needed that personality from every angle, and we got it from every angle. And the cinematography could be one where it's like, okay, if we shot this more traditionally, maybe it wouldn't have. Like if Roger Deakins did this, like it'd be a whole different movie.
A Roger Deakins Spike Lee collaboration. Now that would be interesting.
Like it, like literally, just for a second, think about this. It would be completely
Oh
different.
yeah,
Uh,
100%.
it would not work nearly as well. And
Yeah,
so the cinematography, while I can't be like, I noticed a lot of Dutch angles.
so many, and that's what
So
bugged
many.
me. That's what bugged me because I
Okay.
really don't like Dutch angles. So like the first watch, that's what really bothered me.
I I'm okay with some Dutch angles, but it is so easy to overuse those.
Yeah,
Now, what is a Dutch angle? Well, dear viewer, I'm very glad that you asked. You see, a Dutch angle is when you kind of tilt the camera in such a way where it is supposed to make you feel like uneasy.
mhm.
So it's almost like with a music cue. If you're really good, composer, you can have somebody feel a certain way by the way in which you compose a song. It's like that with with cinematography and a cinematographer, where if you tilt the camera just a little bit, that subconsciously is supposed to signal to us, the viewer, that something's awry, something's amiss. There are so many filmmakers or so many cinematographers that overuse this,
Yeah,
like to the nth degree. And so it kind of a little goes a long way. But in this case, just the variety of angles that this cinematographer, I don't know, it's just like
I think it's. I would love. I wish I would have like kept a counter, or like if I wish
that
someone
would
would
have been
track.
hard as hell.
Well,
It
yes,
would have been so hard.
the building up to the climax. I literally have been clicking that thing like blah, 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 because like every shot's a Dutch angle. Um,
Yeah.
but I feel like I would love to see like a graph of like over time in this movie, like how many Dutch angles are used. Because I have a theory. I
Mm.
think they increase as we move towards the climax, and that builds our tension and moves us towards being uneasy. Because you feel, even though like there doesn't seem to be tension at the beginning of this movie, there's tension, and like you think it's just
Oh, I get the tension from the jump. I
okay.
get the tension.
It, maybe that's was inaccurate of me to say. I want to
No, I
say
know. No. Go ahead.
it's like there's tension, but you don't know why.
Yes.
And like you begin, like everyone's talking about how it's so hot, so you think like the tension and the discomfort comes from like, oh, I'm just supposed to like feel uncomfortable because they're uncomfortable because it's hot. But then like as the movie builds, like you get into so much more and you realize like, no, that's not really why we're uncomfortable. We're uncomfortable because the whole myriad of racial issues in
Yes.
this very interesting neighborhood. But I think like the way that like it they stuck to the bit without it being a gimmick. And that's really, really hard to do with Dutch angles, I think.
Yeah.
Because I
Yeah.
agree, they are like horror movies overuse them to the nth degree, and it bothers the
Yeah.
crap out of me. I mean, I just don't like horror movies in general, but like that really bothers me in those. But like
Yeah.
it was able
There's
to
like there's like a film. It's a Dennis Quaid film, and I can't remember what it is called. It's from like the early 2000s, and we studied it in film class because it overused Dutch angles so much. It's yeah, Dutch angles a little goes a long way, but I completely interrupted you. Please continue.
No, you're fine. Um, I think another aspect that like adds to like the instability that you get from the cinematography here is the amount of handheld shots. There's quite a bit of handheld. And like
Oh, a significant amount.
it doesn't shy away from the shaky nature of it. And it's like it like welcomes like the little bit of shake that inherently comes with handheld.
That's what, and because boiling, right?
Yeah.
We're getting to this inevitable boiling
Mm-hmm.
point in the film, and so I think he does that. It's a choice. I think the correct choice.
Yeah.
Well, there's never a correct choice, but you understand what I'm saying. I think it is the right choice for the narrative and the message to use shaky cam in that way. I mean, think about it this way: shaky cam wasn't a huge thing until kind of like the Bourne films in the early 2000s, and it was utilized specifically to up the tension when Jason Bourne was fighting. So there was a lot of handheld, a lot of shaky cam, and then it became really, really big. And then everyone's like, "Oh my gosh, I need a Dramamine if I'm going to watch this movie." So they
Exactly.
kind of backed off on it. And while obviously this came out over 10 years before, um, the use of shaky cam here, I think, um, is apt.
Yeah.
It's really well done.
It anticipates the early 2000s, like the Bourne film kind of use of it. It seems to anticipate that, which I really like. And I also think like the nature of handheld, and this may be just a me thing coming from news and being a former news photographer, but like whenever I see handheld, like I'm immediately drawn into there's a person operating this, and like there's it's like I'm
Hmm.
drawn like almost like into the scene more as like, oh, this is supposed to be like my POV. Like I'm not like observing this, I'm in it. And I think that's another element to this film in the cinematography that is really interesting, because there's also a significant amount of like fourth wall breaks when characters are like
Yeah.
speaking straight into the camera. Another thing that I really usually hate, but in here it like is able to like it seems to like this film keeps teetering for me between objective and subjective,
Okay.
because it's like there are times that I'm like, oh, this wants me to observe, and then there are times that I'm like, oh, this wants me to like place myself in this story, if
So
that makes
almost
sense.
diegetic, non-diegetic in a way.
Yeah. And it's just it's I think it's a really interesting way to experience the story, is just from that aspect of like, do I feel like I'm watching these a day in the life of these characters, or do I feel like these characters are talking to me? And I think what we just talked about a little bit ago about, the story inviting us into examining what the issues are that exist, but then also our role within them. I think the cinematography, this whole like diegetic, non-diegetic kind of vibe that I'm getting here, really kind of supports that messaging.
Hmm. Yeah, that's good. That's good. Now is the time in the pod where we go and do our rosebud and thorn. As always, Jake, I'm going to pass it off to you first. What are your rosebud and thorn for Do the Right Thing?
So consulting my handy dandy one sheet of notes here, as always. Roses, we got quite a few, so many that I wrote on
Okay.
top of things. Shocking. I like this film.
Jake doesn't go get a second piece of paper. He just writes on top of what he had already written and then tries to remember what it
It's not
says.
my handy dandy sheet and a half of notes. It's my handy dandy one sheet of notes. I have to keep it at one sheet, and it's only one side of it. As you can see, one side of it.
I
Um,
don't use a sheet.
yeah, we get it. You're smart. You have a master's degree. You can remember all this crap. So roses. Um, I really like performance wise. I like Ossie Davis. I like Ruby Dee, and I like Danny Aiello as Sal.
Yeah, as
So it's
Sal.
DeMayer, Mother, Sister, and Sal. I think those are the best performances in this movie. Obviously, like Ossie Davis and Ruby Dee, like had a long career leading up to this.
You
I
could
just
say
like
that.
I could I just love Ossie Davis.
I know he's a legend.
He is so legendary in this. Like just the fact that like he's called dumb mayor, like I'm just like I love you already. And then the way that like Rubini just like doesn't take his shit at all. It's just
It's like they were married.
I
I
know.
mean,
But then like Sal's like nuance, and you kind of touched on this earlier about how like not making Sal this like blatant antagonist. I really picked up on that and the incredible amount of nuance, and a lot of honesty to his character. I think I really enjoyed that in this rewatch. So
yeah, yeah.
a rose goes to that performance as well. Um, if you couldn't tell by my rambling about cinematography, I really liked that in this movie, so that's going to get a rose. And then the score as well, and Spike Lee's direction. He's decent as Mookie. I think he's a better director than he is an actor.
I agree. I think
Um,
you found out. I think you figured that out
yeah.
eventually.
So I'm gonna give it to him as a director here, because I think he was able to balance so many things very well in this movie. So those are my. I don't know. Did I have 6 roses? I had a lot of roses. Who cares? It's my week.
It is.
Um,
It
my
is.
my bud. Um, I don't get Smiley. Like he feels more like a like a plot device than he is like a real character. And like
And not even a plot device.
well, like he's I really feel like he's there to like set the restaurant on fire at the end. Like I feel like that's
And
like
put the picture.
yeah.
Yeah, like that's like the only thing he does.
And it's just like he the reason he's a butt is I think the way that like everyone else in the neighborhood interacts with him is very telling about their characters. And
Yeah.
I think it's interesting from that aspect, but like it's just like it's like overly like I don't know, like it's uncomfortable, like how the performance is and like
It is uncomfortable.
the voice and the stuttering and the like it's very 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 heavy handed. Like
Yeah,
I would say it crosses into offensive probably. Um, so yeah,
I would agree.
that's gonna be my bud, and then my thorn. Um, if you haven't had enough theory film school moments, you're gonna get another one here. So there are 2 moments in this movie, and it's a Spike Lee trademark that I absolutely cannot stand. Um, I remember I first noticed this when I saw Black Klansman in 2018, and I asked my professor Ben Strack about this.
What a goat.
Shout out Ben. I,
Shout
I
out.
I will forever remember that conversation. Every time I see it, it's there's a moment when it's like the edit like repeats itself a little bit. Like there's
Yeah.
an edit point, and you see this um when you see this twice in this movie when Mookie and Tina kiss. You
Yep.
see it happen twice, and then when Mookie throws the trash can, you see it happen twice from like different angles, but it's the same action. And it's just it is such it pulls me out of it. Now, when I talked to Ben Strack about
Track about
this,
it.
yeah, he talked and he said it's he called it a Brechtian, which it's a reference to Bertolt Brecht, is a German poet, playwright, did some screenwriting um, when he came to America after the Nazis took over Germany, but was very those stupid Nazis.
The stupid Nazis. God.
Nazis, I hate these guys.
Yeah. Almost as much as I hate snakes. Anyway, continue.
Um, and like Brecht had this like all his work was about like making it like it put an emphasis on like making sure the audience didn't feel like they were like experiencing a part of the story as they were like observing a performance. Like it was very like emphatic on that. And so these two moments have Brechtian influences because they pull you out of the movie. And I hate it. I mean, I really hate it here. The one in Black Klansman, I hate it less than I hate these. But I really just hate it because I'm like, as you guys have figured out on this podcast thus far, maybe you haven't. This is the first episode you're watching, but I'm very
welcome. We're glad you're here.
Thank you. Make sure to hit the like button and subscribe, ringing that bell for all notifications.
He gets it.
I've heard you say that a few times, but
30. You've heard me say it 30 times. We've done this 30 times.
Anyways, God, I'm getting off track. I'm very much a big on like, I don't want to like know that this is a film. I want to like experience a story.
Yeah.
And like I don't want the like I want to appreciate when the mechanics of filmmaking are good, but I don't want them to be so obvious that it takes me out of the story. And
right.
These two moments just completely just rip me out of the story and I hate it. So that's my thorn. Enough of my rambling. Mr. Ben Sparrow, your rosebud and thorn, please.
Oh, well, since you said please. My roses, I have 3 roses. I thought John Turturro was spectacular as Pino. Just so good. Just so good. He's such an asshole, but he's like such a great performance. I also like the mayor. And at first, so when I first watched this movie, I was like, oh, he's the mayor. It's like, then he walked out and he's like stumbling around. I'm like, he ain't no mayor.
Where's the Miller High Life?
Yeah. He's got Miller High Life. Where's the Miller High Life? You need to get some Miller High Life. I thought he was so enduring. He was like low-key like Mr. Rogers in a way. Like just this kind soul. And was he a little out of pocket at times? Yes, but I feel like that has to do with the heat, not who he is. So I really liked his character a lot. And then four roses. Then the screenplay I thought was great. I thought it was really, really well done. A really well done screenplay. And then the score, which I've waxed poetic about earlier. It's spectacular. It's like I would listen to that just to listen to it. But I would say that the Brechtian, the pulling, because I noticed it and it did take me out of the film, and I felt like the purpose didn't justify it. Like I understand maybe what he's trying to go for there, but I don't feel like it was justifiable to pull me out of the story in that way. Maybe with the trash can, but the Tina thing, yeah. So I didn't really agree with that. And then my thorn was Smiley. That got real old real quick. Just his use. And I kind of understand what he was trying to say, but also like I don't. And that was just not enjoyable for me to watch. It's a great performance because it was so unsettling, but I just didn't like the character. But speaking of character, we now move to who we think we are. And I've got one that is great, but I want to hear yours first. Go ahead.
So
if you say I'm Smiley, I'm walking out.
No, I'm not going to say that. One element of this film we haven't talked about is our
pizza.
Well, that and our 3 guys who just sit around and comment.
Those are legends. There's
the 3 guys that like all they do is just sit around and just like roast everyone.
It was incredible. It was like I literally watched it. I was like, these guys are so funny, like so funny. And there's one in particular
who goes by the name of Sweet Dick Willie. That is who you are. And
he does public urination though. I don't want to be known for that.
I had a feeling it was going to be one of those guys as soon as I was going to pick for you going into this. And then when he starts roasting him about getting a refund for his haircut, I'm like, Ben is going to love. Like, that is a very, like, Ben joke. Like, if I get a bad haircut, like, you are going to roast the crap out of me. And, like, you would roast the crap out of anyone that you knew on that level.
Yes. That I knew on that level.
Yes.
I'm not, look,
you're not going to do that to you. Yeah. You're not going to do that to a stranger. But to me, like, you would.
Unless they deserve it.
You really are.
You know who
guys. You are. Oh, shoot. But no, I thought their humor was very on par with yours. And so you are Sweet Dick Willie. And don't let that go to your head.
They were clowning. Oh my gosh, they were clowning. That was like one of the first texts I sent you was one of the quotes from that. And I was like so out of pocket. Anyway, for me, you are obviously the mayor. And not just because you're like a nice guy, but for those of you that don't know, Jake understands politics a lot more. You've got what is it, Robert's Rules?
I do have a copy of Robert's Rules of Order.
Rick Ross's rules. You have that. You've done student government, things like that. But I don't know. So like the fact that he's called the mayor, but honestly, just kind of his attitude towards things. And then when he's like, "Where's the Miller High Life?" and I was like, I thought Miller was just like Miller Lite is basically just water. That's what we always say at Flicks, but also we sell beer. And then then I was talking to you and you're like, I like Miller Lite. I was like, okay, Mayor. But no, I don't know. He's like Mr. Rogers in a way, mixed with I don't know. He's just legendary. I like
a homeless guy.
Yeah, like a homeless guy. And like Oscar I wouldn't be surprised if he started singing Civil War songs. Like, you know. So no, I thought he maybe had the best performance. I know I said John Turturro was great, and I think John Turturro won an Oscar or was nominated. Or was it David Aiello?
Danny Aiello. Yeah.
Right. David Aiello is not a person. Or maybe he is. I don't know. I don't care. Yeah. So anyway, long story long. You're the mayor.
The mayor.
Okay.
Do the right thing.
Do the right thing. Final thoughts on Do the Right Thing. Jake, what are your final thoughts?
I love this movie. I mean, like I really like collecting movie posters, and like I only collect posters of the movies I really thoroughly enjoy, and this is one of them. It's so good. It's such a well-crafted story. I think it has a lot to say, but like we've said before, it really invites you in to be part of the conversation and examine your own role. And if it makes you uncomfortable, like it's supposed to make you a little uncomfortable. So lean into that discomfort, educate yourself, talk to someone about it, you know, think critically about societal structure. And I'll get off my soapbox here in a second, but like, this is like, to me, this is like the apex of like where like a good story, artistic vision, and like an important message all meet and like converge into this like point in the middle of a triangle where it's just like the top of the pyramid. And I like, this is like the apex of what cinema can be. And so I think that's the best way I can sum up of how much I love this movie. I would encourage everyone to see it. Yeah, it's a good movie.
Yeah, I basically I could say the exact same stuff. I think this film is spectacular. I'd never seen it. I made the decision to spend $4.99 on buying it instead of $3.99 on renting it, and I'm very glad I made that decision. Um, there are obviously some faults, as with any film. Like we said, our buds and our thorns are the things that we didn't really enjoy all that much. But this is low-key one of the best movies I've seen in a long time. Um, I think it is singularly spectacular for the fact that it does not vilify, it doesn't vilify the audience,
Mm-hmm.
right? It doesn't make you feel like it brings everybody together by saying things need to get done, things need to get worked on.
Yeah.
So if you are somebody that wants to understand the other perspective a little bit better, I think this is a movie for you. Um, and if you are somebody that wants somebody else to kind of understand your perspective, I think this is the movie for you. I think this is a movie that you can show because it's not heavy handed. The message is correct. It is important, but it is not off putting. And that I think is something that we don't always see, right? You can have the right message, but you can be a little off putting by it, and that turns people off. But in this scenario and in this film, that doesn't really happen. And so I think it is just singularly just a spectacular film. So highly recommend it. And I know Jake said he highly recommended it, but the question is for you. Have you seen Do the Right Thing? Did you like it? Did you not? Do you agree with us or do you not? Let us know your Rosebud and Thorn, your final thoughts, your opening thoughts, whatever you want to talk about in the comments down below. Make sure to hit that like button if you like this video. That really helps us out with the algorithm, and hit that subscribe button, ring that bell to get all notifications on upcoming content. We've got plenty more in the weeks to come. Make sure to follow us on social media. Follow myself and Jake. You see the socials right there, and follow the Cinefile. But for Jake Biller, I'm Ben Sparrow. Thanks so much for watching. We'll see you back here next week, and cut.